The Secret to a Peaceful Sleep, Monk Thomas and the Art of Simple Meditation. The night was eerily quiet, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Inside the old monastery in Vermont, Monk Thomas sat in meditation, his breath steady, his mind at peace. The dim candlelight flickered, casting long shadows against the wooden walls. Everything was still. Then, a piercing scream shattered the silence. "Help me, I can't sleep, I don't want to die." The voice trembled with desperation, raw and unfiltered. Outside the temple gate stood an elderly woman, her frail body shaking in the cold night air. She was dressed in a wrinkled nightgown, her feet bare against the stone path. Her hair was disheveled, her face gaunt, and her eyes, deep sunken hollows, spoke of endless, tormenting nights without rest. Monk Thomas slowly opened his eyes. He had heard suffering before, had seen it manifest in many ways, but there was something haunting about the way this woman clung to the wooden doors, as if they were the only thing keeping her from falling into an abyss. He rose to his feet and walked toward her, his movements slow and deliberate. "Come inside," he said softly, his voice steady like the surface of a still lake. The woman hesitated, then stepped into the dimly lit hall, her hands gripping the sleeves of her nightgown, as if trying to hold herself together. She looked around as if expecting the shadows to move, as if fearing what might come next. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Every night when I close my eyes, I see them. My husband, my mother, my sister. They are calling to me. I hear their voices. I feel their pain. It's as if the past refuses to let me go." She swallowed hard, her breath uneven. "I try to fight it, but the moment I start to drift, the fear takes over. It feels like I'm dying, like I will never wake up again." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not wipe them away. She simply stared at Monk Thomas, pleading for an answer, for something, anything, to free her from the nightmare she could never escape. The monk watched her carefully, his gaze gentle yet unwavering. Then, after a moment, he spoke. "If you cannot stop the waves of your mind," he said, "perhaps it is time to learn how to float." Eleanor sat on the worn wooden floor of the temple, her breath still uneven, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The candlelight flickered, casting soft, shifting shadows across the ancient walls. Everything was still, yet inside her, a storm raged on. Monk Thomas watched her with quiet compassion. He had seen suffering take many forms: grief, regret, fear, but there was something uniquely heavy about the burden Eleanor carried. It was not just exhaustion, it was the weight of a lifetime of memories pressing down on her with relentless force. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice calm yet deliberate. "Eleanor, if you cannot stop your thoughts, why not learn to let them pass?" She lifted her weary eyes to him, confusion flickering across her face. "Let them pass? How? They don't pass. They come back, over and over. No matter how hard I try to push them away, they return." Monk Thomas nodded. "That is because you are fighting them. Imagine standing in a river, struggling against the current. The more you resist, the harder the water pushes against you. But what if you simply let go? What if, instead of fighting, you allowed yourself to float?" Eleanor frowned slightly, considering his words. "But if I don't fight, won't they drown me?" The monk smiled gently. "Only if you believe they have power over you." He gestured toward the dimly lit hall around them. "Come, let me show you something." She hesitated but followed him deeper into the temple, her bare feet pressing against the cool wooden floor. There was a presence in the air, something she couldn't quite name, but it felt ancient, steady, unmoved by time. Monk Thomas guided her to a quiet space, where a small meditation cushion sat beside an open window. The night air drifted in, carrying the scent of earth and rain. He motioned for her to sit. "There is a secret," he said softly, lowering himself onto the cushion beside her. "Her secret that has the power to change everything." Eleanor swallowed, feeling her heartbeat slow. For the first time in years, she felt something stir within her, not fear, not exhaustion, but curiosity. And so, in the stillness of the temple, her journey began. Eleanor sat in the quiet temple, the scent of sandalwood lingering in the air. The candle beside her flickered softly, casting golden hues on the wooden walls. She had spent so many nights fearing the darkness, fearing the silence. But here, in this moment, the stillness did not feel threatening. It felt gentle. Monk Thomas sat across from her, his posture relaxed yet steady. He had spent decades teaching meditation, guiding those who carried heavy burdens, but he knew that words alone would not be enough. Eleanor needed to feel the truth of what he was about to say. "Eleanor," he began, his voice calm, steady, "many people believe meditation is about emptying the mind, forcing thoughts to disappear. But that is not the way." She looked at him, her brows slightly furrowed. "Then how do I stop these thoughts? How do I quiet my mind?" The monk smiled. "You don't. You learn to let the thoughts come and go, like clouds drifting across the sky." Eleanor remained silent, letting his words settle in. "You see," Monk Thomas continued, "thoughts, like the wind, like the seasons, are natural. The problem is not that you have thoughts. The problem is that you chase them, fight them, believe every single one of them. But what if, instead, you simply observed them? What if you let them pass without clinging to them, without fearing them?" Eleanor's fingers tightened around the edge of her robe. "That sounds easier said than done," the monk nodded knowingly. "Let me tell you a story." He took a slow breath before beginning. "Once there was a great and powerful king. He had everything: wealth, land, servants, the finest silks, the most exquisite foods. But despite all of this, he suffered. Every night, he lay in his grand bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. No matter how many comforts surrounded him, no matter how soft his pillows or how quiet his chamber, he was tormented by his own thoughts. The past, the future, regrets, fears, they all came rushing. In the moment he closed his eyes, Eleanor listened intently, her own experience reflected in the king's suffering. One night, desperate for relief, the king summoned a wise monk to his palace. "Tell me," the king pleaded, "what must I do to sleep in peace?" The monk smiled and said, "Let go." The king frowned. "Let go of what? My kingdom? My riches?" The monk shook his head. "Let go of trying. Let go of your need to control. Your mind is like a lake, but you stir it constantly, searching for stillness. If you stop struggling, the water will settle on its own." That night, for the first time in years, the king slept soundly. Eleanor exhaled deeply. The story touched something inside her, something she had never considered before. Monk Thomas met her gaze. Peace does not come from controlling everything. It comes from allowing things to be as they are. For the first time in a long time, Eleanor wondered, what if she had been holding on too tightly? What if the answer had been there all along, waiting for her to let go? Monk Thomas observed Eleanor closely, noticing the way her hands trembled slightly as she held her cup of tea. He could see the hesitation in her eyes, the doubt that clung to her like a shadow. She had spent years fighting against the tide of her own mind, and now the idea of simply sitting still, of surrendering to the present moment, seemed almost impossible. Sensing her unease, he spoke in a gentle, reassuring tone. "Before we begin, let's prepare. Meditation is not about forcing yourself into stillness. It's about creating the right conditions for peace to arise naturally, just as a flower blooms when the soil is ready." Eleanor glanced around the dimly lit temple hall, where the soft flicker of candlelight danced against the wooden walls. There was a sense of quiet serenity in the space, but she wasn't sure she could ever feel that within herself. Her mind had been restless for so long, caught in an endless loop of regrets and fears. Monk Thomas gestured toward the open doorway, where the cool night air drifted in. "You don't need a sacred place like this to meditate. You only need a quiet corner, a small space where you feel at ease, perhaps near a window where you can listen to the wind, or even in your bed before sleep. It doesn't matter where, only that you allow yourself to be fully present." Eleanor hesitated. She had always imagined meditation as something done by monks in distant temples, something requiring strict discipline and perfect silence. "I always thought meditation had to be done in a special place," she admitted. The monk shook his head with a kind smile. "Meditation is not separate from life. It is for everyone, everywhere. If you wait for the perfect time or place, you will never begin." She nodded slowly, considering his words. Monk Thomas then settled onto his cushion, his movements fluid and unhurried. With his back straight but relaxed, his hands resting gently in his lap, he looked completely at ease. "You don't have to sit like this," he said, sensing her uncertainty. "Find a position that feels comfortable for you. Sit in a chair if you prefer, or if your body is tired, lie down. The key is to be relaxed, but not so much that you drift into sleep." Eleanor looked around and then chose a simple wooden chair. Easing herself into it, she placed her feet flat on the floor and rested her hands gently on her knees. She adjusted herself a few times, shifting in search of the right position. "Like this?" she asked hesitantly. Monk Thomas nodded. "Yes." The goal isn't to force your body into a rigid posture. It's to create a sense of ease, to allow your body to settle naturally. She exhaled, feeling a small release of tension, but her brow remained furrowed. "What if I don't do it right? What if my mind keeps running in circles?" The monk chuckled softly, a warm and knowing sound. "Then let it. Meditation isn't about stopping your thoughts. It's about watching them without holding on to them, like watching leaves float down a river. The more you try to push thoughts away, the stronger they become. But if you simply observe, they will come and go on their own." Eleanor let his words settle, but she still looked uncertain. "I don't know if I can just let them go. My mind has been like this for so long." Monk Thomas leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but filled with kindness. "You don't need to be good at meditation. There is no test to pass, no perfect way to do it. Just allow yourself to be here in this moment, without trying to change anything." For the first time in a long while, Eleanor felt a small shift within herself. It wasn't dramatic and it wasn't complete, but it was there, a quiet understanding. That maybe, just maybe, peace was not as unreachable as she had believed. Monk Thomas sat quietly, his presence as steady as the ancient trees surrounding the temple. The candlelight flickered softly, casting long shadows on the wooden walls. Eleanor, sitting across from him, took a deep breath, feeling both hesitant and hopeful. She had spent a lifetime running from her thoughts, fighting against the past, fearing the future. But now, for the first time, she was being asked to simply be, to sit with herself in the stillness. Sensing her apprehension, Monk Thomas spoke in a calm, reassuring voice. "Meditation is like a boat floating on a vast lake. Your breath is the boat, carrying you across the water. Your mind is the lake itself. When the water is disturbed, the boat rocks and sways, making it difficult to stay balanced. But when the lake is calm, the boat moves effortlessly, gliding across the surface without resistance." Eleanor let his words settle over her like a warm blanket. She had spent so much of her life fighting against the waves, trying to control the water, never realizing she could simply sit in the boat and let it carry her. "Let's begin, Monk," Thomas said gently. She nodded. "First, close your eyes." Eleanor hesitated for a moment, then slowly let her eyelids fall shut. The world around her disappeared, leaving only the sound of her breath and the faint rustling of the wind outside. "Bring your awareness to your breath," the monk continued. "Do not try to change it. Do not force it to be slower or deeper. Simply notice it, as if you were watching the tide move in and out." She focused on the sensation of air entering her nose, filling her lungs, and then leaving her body. For a moment it felt peaceful, but soon thoughts began to creep in. Did I remember to lock the door? What if this doesn't work? What if my mind never stops? Before she could get lost in them, Monk Thomas spoke again. "When thoughts arise, do not fight them. Do not try to push them away. Simply acknowledge them, like clouds passing through the sky, and gently return your attention to the breath." Eleanor took another slow breath, allowing the thought to drift away like a leaf on a river. "Now," the monk instructed, "inhale slowly and deeply." She drew in a breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. Hold it for a moment. Feel the stillness. In that space between the inhale and the exhale, Eleanor noticed the tiny pause, a brief moment of quiet before the release. Now exhale slowly. Let the air flow out naturally, like a breeze moving through the trees. She followed his guidance, feeling her shoulders relax just a little. Again, Monk Thomas said, "Inhale." She drew in another breath, deeper this time. Hold. A moment of stillness. Exhale. She released the breath, feeling a subtle shift within her. Minutes passed, though she had no sense of time. Her mind still wandered. Memories, worries, stray thoughts drifting in and out. But each time she gently returned to her breath. Then Monk Thomas spoke again. "If your mind is restless, repeat this phrase silently. An nien tu tai." Eleanor mouthed the words, their meaning sinking into her heart. Peaceful and free. Each inhale brought a sense of calm. Each exhale let go of a little more. Wait. For the first time in a long while, she was no longer fighting against the waves. She was simply floating, and for now, that was enough. The temple was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of candlelight. Outside, the night was still, the wind barely rustling through the trees. Eleanor sat across from Monk Thomas, her body weary, her mind restless. Sleep had been a stranger to her for so long. No matter how exhausted she was, the moment she lay down, her thoughts would come rushing in, memories of the past, fears of the future, regrets that refused to fade. Monk Thomas studied her face and spoke gently. "Tonight, before you sleep, we will try something different. Instead of fighting sleep, instead of trying to force your mind to be quiet, we will simply let go, like a leaf floating on a gentle stream." Eleanor listened, intrigued but skeptical. "A leaf," the monk nodded. "Close your eyes and imagine a quiet river, its surface smooth and endless. Now imagine yourself as a single leaf resting on that water." She hesitated, then let her eyes flutter shut. A river appeared in her mind, its waters calm and deep. A single leaf, golden and delicate, drifted on its surface. With each breath, the monk continued, "The river carries the leaf farther and farther away. There is no effort, no resistance. The leaf does not try to control where it goes. It simply allows the water to guide it." Eleanor inhaled deeply, picturing the leaf moving gently downstream. As she exhaled, she imagined her worries dissolving, flowing away with the current. "The more you breathe, the farther the leaf drifts," the monk said softly. "Every inhale lifts it slightly. Every exhale carries it gently forward, away. From your fears, away from your restless thoughts." She could feel it now, her body growing lighter, her mind loosening its grip. The river was carrying her deeper into peace, further from the noise inside her head. "Now feel your body relax," the monk instructed. "Let your feet become soft, like the leaf itself. Then your legs, your arms, your hands, let them all become weightless, floating effortlessly on the water." Eleanor obeyed, surrendering to the sensation. Her muscles released their tension. The tightness in her chest softened. The river held her, supported her. "There is nothing to do, nowhere to be, just floating, just breathing, just being." The words sank into her, settling into the spaces where fear once lived. "Sleep does not come when we chase it, Monk," Thomas whispered. "It comes when we let ourselves drift into it like the leaf on the water." Eleanor exhaled one last time, long and slow. And for the first time in years, sleep found her. Not through force, not through struggle, but through letting go. 1 month had passed since that restless night when Eleanor first arrived at the temple, desperate for peace. The trees had begun to shed their golden leaves, the air had turned crisp, and the temple grounds were blanketed in quiet beauty. But the greatest change was not in the season. It was in Eleanor herself. As she stepped through the temple gates once more, her posture was different. There was no frantic energy in her movements, no exhaustion weighing her down. Her face, once drawn with worry and sleeplessness, now carried a softness, a quiet joy. The dark circles under her eyes had faded, and for the first time in years her smile felt effortless, unburdened. Monk Thomas greeted her with a knowing nod, but he said nothing, waiting for her to speak. "I slept," Eleanor finally said, her voice filled with wonder. "I slept without fear, without medicine, for the first time in years." The words seemed almost too good to be true, as if she still couldn't quite believe it herself. But they were real. Every night she had practiced the meditation he had taught her. She had let her thoughts come and go without resistance. She had learned to breathe, to soften, to surrender to sleep the way a leaf surrenders to the river. And in doing so, she had found what had always eluded her: rest. Monk Thomas smiled, his eyes warm with understanding. You see, Eleanor, you never needed a miracle. You only needed to let go. She took a deep breath, letting his words settle in her heart. For so long, she had believed that peace was something out of reach, something she had to chase, something she had to earn. But in the end, peace had always been there, waiting for her to stop fighting, to stop clinging, to simply be. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not from exhaustion or fear. They were from gratitude, from relief, from the quiet joy of knowing she had finally found her way home, to herself. As she bowed in thanks, Monk Thomas only smiled. He had seen this transformation before, but each time it was as beautiful as the first. Eleanor turned to leave, stepping out into the crisp autumn air. This time, she did not carry the weight of the past with her. She did not fear the night. Ahead, she would sleep peacefully tonight, and every night after. The autumn breeze whispered through the temple grounds as Eleanor walked away, her steps lighter than they had been in years. The past no longer clung to her like a shadow. She had learned what Monk Thomas had been trying to teach her all along, not through lectures, not through force, but through experience. For so much of her life she had fought against the waves of her own mind, trying to control every thought, every fear, every restless night. But now she understood. We cannot stop the waves, but we can learn to ride them. This was the essence of meditation, the heart of true peace. Life would always bring uncertainty, grief, and change. The mind would always have its storms. But peace was never about eliminating struggle. It was about learning to move with it instead of against it. Eleanor had spent years searching for a solution to her insomnia. She had tried medicine, distractions, rigid routines, but nothing had worked. In the end, the answer had been the simplest one of all: letting go. Sleep was not something she could chase or force. It came naturally when she stopped resisting, when she stopped treating her thoughts like enemies to be defeated, and instead allowed them to come and go like the wind passing through the trees. Meditation was not a difficult practice reserved for monks in distant temples. It was not about achieving perfection or emptying the mind completely. It was a way of living, a way of being present with whatever arose, without clinging to it, without pushing it away. This lesson is more important today than ever before. In a world that never stops moving, where stress, anxiety, and sleepless nights have become the norm, we often search for external solutions, medications, distractions, endless scrolling through our phones, hoping to quiet the unrest within us. But true peace does not come from escaping reality. It comes from learning to be at peace within it. We live in an age of constant stimulation, where silence is rare and stillness is uncomfortable. But perhaps, like Eleanor, we need to remember that stillness is not the absence of life. It is the foundation of it. Meditation is not about removing thoughts, but about changing our relationship with them. When we stop resisting, we stop suffering. True rest, true peace, does not come from the absence of struggle, but from the ability to remain still within it. That night, as Eleanor lay in bed, she did not fear sleep. She did not brace herself for another battle against her own thoughts. Instead, she took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. She let herself drift, like a leaf on a river, carried by the gentle current of her breath. And just like that, sleep arrived, not as something she had to conquer, but as something she had finally learned to welcome. Perhaps this is a lesson we all need to learn.